It was the late winter of 2007 when I received some very timely, helpful wisdom. I happened to be at the gym with a pastor friend of mine, Mark Patterson, lifting weights, and we ran into a fellow pastor that he knew well. I'd never met the guy before. I can't even remember his name. So we'll just call him Richard, okay, for the point of this story here. But we just started chatting, and Mark and Richard were catching up with each other. And somehow it emerged from the conversation that I was soon to be going before the board of ordained ministry. Now, for those of you who are not really familiar with Methodism, I'll just kind of break it down for you, distill it for you in this way, is that the board of ordained ministry operates as the gatekeepers of the Methodist Church. They determine who gets ordained and who doesn't get ordained. And getting ordained is a big deal, meaning like once I was ordained, it was like I was a made man, a tenured professor, a Supreme Court justice. I mean, you're guaranteed job security unless you do something stupid like join Al-Qaeda. So there's great job security. So there's a lot running on that. And so Richard was like, you know what? My sister is on the board of ordained ministry. And you know what? She gets frustrated with quite a few candidates. And I just kind of leaned in a little bit more because I thought, I bet some nugget of wisdom is coming my way. So I said, well, what does she get frustrated about? He said, she's noticed a pattern. She doesn't know why, but she finds that people, candidates, will routinely cut off the questioners before they have an opportunity to finish asking their question. She's not sure whether they're nervous or rude, but it just really annoys her. And he looked at me and he said, Keith, my best advice for you when you go before the board of ordained ministry is simply let them finish asking their question. Let them finish and pause 1 second. Because when you pause 1 second before you begin to speak your answer, you communicate respect. You communicate that you really listen to their question, that you're kind of mulling it over in your mind before you speak. And you come across as a thoughtful person as well. And I can tell you, I took his advice with me to the board of ordained ministry and I surfed right through. I had to meet before 3 different committees. One that examined me on whether or not I was actually called to be a minister, whether I was living a disciplined Christian life. There was another group that asked me questions and had viewed one of my sermons. And then finally, there was a group that questioned me on my understanding of Christian doctrine. They wanted to know what my theology was. And so in each of those groups, I let the people ask their question. I listened waited at least a second before I responded to their questions. And it went very, very well, very easy. And because of that, and thankfully the grace of God, I was ordained. And so what seemed like a chance accidental meeting with this gentleman that passed on this nugget of wisdom to me, I suspect that maybe the Holy Spirit was at work, helping me to get ready for it. I mean, I'm sure all of you could come up with your own stories about how you've received timely, wise counsel before. I mean, we've all received it. But it won't surprise you that through human history, people have collected wisdom sayings in the form of wisdom literature. Now, I'm more familiar with the ancient Near East, in which Israel was situated in. And I can tell you that people treasured their own wisdom traditions, but they were exposed to the ideas of wisdom of other individuals, people who were passing through neighboring lands, people who were your trade partners, sometimes people that you even went to war with. You would pay attention to their wisdom, and if you felt like that fits with us, you would assimilate that. You would incorporate that into your own wisdom collections as well. As a matter of fact, in the Bible, we have wisdom literature. If you've ever read Ecclesiastes, if you've ever read Job, they are speculative wisdom literature pieces. But probably the most recognizable that would quickly come to our minds would be Proverbs, right? What a great collection of wisdom. And we're going to be back in Proverbs today. Wisdom isn't easy to define. How would you define it if someone were to ask you, tell me, what does wisdom mean? I mean, what would a dictionary entry look like? Whew, that would be a tall task, wouldn't it? Wisdom is a word where we quickly get a general idea of what it means, and we're very comfortable using it in a sentence, but try to define it, it's a tall order. But that's something that I'm going to try to do. I want to start first with the Hebrew word chakmah. Now, those who speak modern Hebrew would pronounce it chokmah, but chakmah is a Hebrew word that translators look at and often translate into English as wisdom. But they don't always translate chakmah as wisdom. Sometimes they translate it as shrewdness. Sometimes they translate it as experience. Sometimes it's an aptitude. Sometimes a special skill. But much of the time, it is wisdom. So if we take all of those possible translations for chakmah, what can that communicate to us about the essence of that word? Well, I think one of the first observations we can make is that chakmah is not just any kind of knowledge. It is practical knowledge, okay? It's practical. And I've always thought of wisdom as being practical knowledge. It's actually knowledge that you can use very easy in a pragmatic fashion. Not all knowledge is the same. I remember reading about and learning about the Pythagorean theorem whenever I was a sophomore in high school. Look, if you need to be an architect or you need to use some geometry, knowing the Pythagorean theorem is going to be helpful. However, it's not going to be the most practical knowledge that you can gain. What's going to be more practical? Knowledge that's going to help you navigate through communicating with other people on an interpersonal level. Because people are everywhere, right? What I learned from Richard is more wisdom because it's very practical. So let's think of wisdom as practical knowledge. Some people would also define wisdom as good sense. I can remember my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, one time said, he ain't got no sense. What did she mean by that? I knew what she meant. She wasn't saying that this guy couldn't read. She wasn't communicating that this guy couldn't write or do simple arithmetic. No, what she was saying is that when it comes to making good decisions, he doesn't do it. He makes foolish decisions, okay? And so if a person ain't got no sense, they're not a very wise person. Because again, I think by definition, wisdom is practical knowledge. It's good sense. It's something that equips us for making good, wise choices in life. So when you come across the word wisdom in Scripture, more often than not, if you keep those ideas in mind, you're going to understand what wisdom is quite well. Let's go back to the beginning of Proverbs. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1 of the first chapter. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. What do those verses communicate to you? We could spend quite a bit of time unpacking the great wisdom, the great counsel that they have for us. One of the things that jumps out at me is that I don't think people are born wise. People have to be taught to be wise. It's helpful for youth to be instructed, but if we're honest, even we adults need godly counsel. It's important for us to seek out wise counsel. I'm going to go back to that one verse. I think this is terrific. Verse 5, a wise man will hear and increase in learning. It's not like a wise man thinks, I have arrived, I don't need to learn any more things. No, it's a posture of life. It's a level of an intentionality that seeks out wisdom. But it goes on, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. We all need wisdom. We all need wise counsel. Folks, a question you're going to have to answer is, are you going to pursue a life of wisdom? Are you going to do it? Or are you going to be a foolish individual? Because if you don't pursue wisdom, if you don't pursue godly counsel, you're going to make loads of foolish decisions in your life. And we need wise thinkers. There's never been a time where wise thinkers have not been needed. By now, I'm hoping every single one of you are basically saying, Keith, I'm ready to sign up. How can I pursue a life of wisdom? I don't want to make foolish decisions. I don't want to be a fool. I want to be a wise individual. But Keith, I need you to give me something concrete. I need you to give me something specific that I can begin to do now, that I can do each day, that's going to put me in a position to become a wise individual. There's a lot of different things that you could do. But for now, there will be more in the coming weeks. Focus on verse 5. Focus on verse 5 because it contains some core characteristics of a wise individual person. Now, I don't want to get into the basics of Hebrew poetry, but the main thing that I want to communicate to you is that a wise person and a person of understanding are the same individuals, okay? It's synonymous. So I don't want you to think, oh, these are two different individuals. No, it's the same. The poet just did not want to use the same word line after line after line after line. But this is all about a wise person. Well, what's the first thing that a wise person does? Just going over this quickly. Will hear and increase in learning. If I were to distill that down at a very basic level, a wise person is teachable. A wise person's never going to get in a position where they can say, I know all I need to know about the Bible. I don't really think I need to learn anything about the history of the church and any of the traditions that it really offers to me. I don't think I'm going to learn anything more from God through my prayer life or things that are not even explicitly Christian, but things that are true and therefore ultimately have their origin in God. I don't think you're ever going to have a point and say, well, I don't need to learn any of that stuff either. No, a person who is wise is teachable and also open. They're open to learning new things. Okay, I'd like for you to seek out wisdom, but at the very least, I think it's important to be open to being taught something new. Secondly, you find that a man of understanding, basically a wise person, will acquire wise counsel. If I were to distill this one down too, I would say that a wise person is someone who's humble. It takes humility to say, hey, as I'm facing this massive decision in my life, maybe I have a blind spot. Maybe I'm not seeing this clearly. Maybe I need to bring in someone who's wise and can give me another perspective or help me see this differently, okay? Look, you don't go just ask anybody. Don't allow just anybody to speak into your life. That can create some massive problems for you. No, seek out a wise individual, a godly person to give you that wise counsel. I believe that if you maintain these characteristics of being teachable, of being open, and being humble, that's going to get you well on your way to being a wise individual. God bless you. I mentioned just a moment ago that wisdom is practical knowledge. It's good sense. And so last week we were in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, and that was talking about the importance of disciplining children. We looked at a number of other Proverbs. We could just go down one more verse and find another nugget of great wisdom. I almost said practical wisdom, but wisdom by definition is practical. Verse 7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Let's take a look at that second portion of that verse there. And the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Now, whether you conceive of the lender or the debt as the problem, the point is debt can act as an enslaving force. It can be an incredible burden that can consume your life. This is practical, helpful counsel for people who want to live a life of wisdom. And so I'm just going to give you just a brief story about why I discontinued my pursuit of pursuing a PhD. And a lot of it ended up having to do with debt. That ended up being the death knell for me. Now, for years, I wanted to go pursue a PhD, and when it came to counting the cost, I never really factored in the financial cost. What I thought of was the studying time cost. That's what I figured in. And could I cut it? That's all I really thought about. But when it came time to apply, I began to kind of experience some misgivings. I found out that at the time that the average income for a new professor across disciplines, it doesn't matter whether it was like New Testament, biology, chemistry, engineering, whatever, was between $40,000 and $50,000. Now, that's not very much money, but it's certainly even less money in terms of value when you think about the debt that's often incurred in pursuing a college degree. And for me, it was going to be a PhD. But I applied anyway, not thinking too much about it. I knew, well, the pay's not great, but I'll find a way to make it work. Meanwhile, I heard that in America, for every opening for a position, for someone to teach New Testament here in America that will require a PhD, they would often get around 90 applicants. Now, do the math on that. If only half of the people were qualified, that's stiff competition. And there's not very many openings that actually emerge each year. So the job prospects were actually pretty poor because the market was flooded with PhDs. Well, when I was finally accepted and I realized the price tag, it kind of rocked me. I talked with another friend who was already doing his PhD at the University of St. Andrews, and he said, Keith, if you live frugally, okay, it's going to cost you roughly 50,000 American dollars a year. 50,000. And you do the math, it would take about 4 years. That's $200,000 to qualify to make between $40,000 and $50,000. But think about unearned income, because you're going to school full time. That you got to add at least another $100,000, maybe $150,000 of unearned income over a 4-year period. And I just thought, you know what? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, fine, if you get a full ride scholarship, yeah, it can be a wise investment. And A friend of mine actually was able to do that. But for someone like myself, who is going to have to take out loans for that, it just didn't make any sense. And I think, as a side note, here in America, if we want to be committed to living a wise life, a life where we are not controlled by our debt, we have to revisit this thinking that says, okay, well, you graduated from high school, all right, you should automatically go to college. No, not anymore. Yeah, if you want to teach, you're going to need to. You want to be in engineering, yeah, you're going to need to. But there are many jobs you can get and do well that do not require a college degree. I remember when I first started seminary, my first semester, one seminary class cost me $450. $450. That's peanuts now. When I finished my second master's degree at that same institution back in 2019, so you go from 1999 to 2019, you know how much that $450 class had inflated to? It had grown to around $1,900. You cannot tell me the value of the degree had grown to meet the price of the degree. So it's important for us to live a wise life where we count the cost and understand the enslaving force that debt can be to us.